After selling my company for $32 million, I announced a charity donation at my 72nd birthday party. I saw my daughter-in-law slip something into my champagne, so I quietly switched glasses with her. A few minutes later, she started. Chapter 1. The toast that shook the room. I had spent 72 years building my name, and in a single evening, I planned to give it all away. The ballroom of the Fairmont Grand in San Francisco glittered under soft chandeliers. Dozens of faces, some loving, some calculating, had gathered for my birthday. But this wasn't just a celebration of age. It was the farewell tour of a man who built his empire from scratch. The champagne was flowing, the jazz band hummed behind me, and somewhere across the room I spotted her, Elaine, my daughter-in-law, smiling just a little too hard. She hadn't hugged me. She hadn't even looked me in the eyes all night. And yet, when I rose to make my toast, she stood close enough to refill my glass. Her diamond-studded nails brushed the rim. My son, Alex, held their 3-year-old, Henry, in his arms. Elaine's expression softened only when she looked at him. Not at me. I raised my glass. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice clear despite the hum of age. Tonight isn't just about me. It's about legacy. About giving back. About knowing when enough is enough. There were polite chuckles, but also tense jaws. Everyone in that room knew I had sold my company for $32 million. Clean, no debts, no partners. And so, I'm announcing tonight that I will be donating 90% of my estate to a series of children's health and education foundations. The paperwork is done. It's irreversible. Effective this evening. There it was. The room fell quiet. Forks froze midair. A few gasps broke the silence. Then, like a well-rehearsed performance, came the applause, led by those who had nothing to gain or lose. But Elaine. She was stone. Her eyes locked onto mine. And then she smiled. Not a warm smile. A thin, twitchy grin that didn't touch her eyes. She walked over, holding a fresh flute of champagne. You forgot to refill, she said sweetly. And just like that, she handed me the glass. But here's the thing. I saw her 5 minutes earlier. A tiny white pill slipped from her sleeve into that very glass, just as the band had kicked into a crescendo. No one else saw it. But I did. 72 years teaches you when something's off. And Elaine had been off for years. So I played along. I raised the champagne again, pretending I didn't notice the faint white swirl still dissolving. Then, as everyone clinked glasses and shouted, "To George!" I turned slightly and switched my glass with hers. I watched her sip. I watched her swallow. And I watched her blink twice before the glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Her eyes rolled. Her knees buckled. The music stopped. People rushed. My son screamed. And I stood in silence, glass still in hand. Watching as chaos bloomed across the marble floor. I didn't say a word. Because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The pill. She didn't swallow. Elaine collapsed with all the grace of a toppled mannequin. Stiff. Wrong. Almost rehearsed. Guests shrieked. Someone dropped a wine glass. The band stopped mid-note. But I just watched. A man doesn't reach 72 without learning to read between the lines, especially when those lines are written in poison. Alex rushed to her side. Elaine. Elaine. Somebody call an ambulance. She lay there, twitching. Then still. The room folded around her like a bad dream, concerned whispers rising like steam. But something was off. No foaming at the mouth. No convulsions. No gasping. Just the right amount of drama to make everyone forget what had just happened. The will. The donation. The legacy. She was buying time. While the guests scrambled, I quietly left the ballroom. I knew Elaine. I knew her ambition. The fake compliments. The sudden push for me to retire. The obsession with my estate. I'd watched her manipulate Alex like a puppet on silk strings, turning my son into a meek echo of himself. But this was new. This was war. I took the elevator to the executive floor, where I had a suite reserved just in case I needed to rest. I didn't plan to use it. But tonight, I needed a place to think. When I opened the minibar, something caught my eye. My keycard, cloned and placed back crooked. And inside the suite, things were shifted. My briefcase, the one I kept double-locked, had been opened and carefully reclosed. I could smell her perfume on the handle. I opened it slowly. Everything was still there. Bank documents, foundation papers, the notarized copy of the will. But nestled between the folders was something new. A pill bottle, unmarked, half empty, and a folded note. Think twice before you erase what should be ours. That was when it clicked. She never meant for me to drink the poison. She knew I was watching. The performance downstairs? It wasn't about killing me. It was a distraction. A smoke bomb. To let someone else, probably Alex, sneak in and tamper with the one thing that still gave me legal control. The original documents. I smiled, sharper than I had in years. Poor Elaine. She thought this game was still in its opening moves. But she forgot one thing. I've buried men smarter than her in business suits and silk ties. I've negotiated with governments, dodged tax traps, outlived boardroom traders. And if she thought I didn't have a backup, or that I didn't expect this exact move, then she clearly never read the fine print in the grandson clause. Back downstairs, the paramedics were rolling her out. She had miraculously stabilized. Already talking. Weak, of course. Dramatic. But when our eyes met again, I raised my untouched champagne glass and gave her a subtle nod. She blinked. Just once. And I saw it. Fear. Not because she failed to poison me, but because she realized. I never intended to die. Chapter 3. The hidden will in the attic. I waited until the house was dark. Not my main estate. The one with cameras and fake security alarms for show. No. I drove to the first house. The one Elaine didn't even know existed. A humble 3-bedroom in Pennsylvania, purchased under an alias decades ago. A place with no inheritance paperwork, no flashy cars, no art collections. Just memories and secrets, buried beneath floorboards and locked away in attic beams. I parked in the gravel driveway at 2:03 a.m. The air was thick with spring fog, clinging like breath to the windows. I opened the attic hatch and climbed up with a flashlight and a wrench. The wood groaned beneath my weight, just like it had when I was 35, hiding cash and deeds before I ever made my first million. But what I came for was inside an old metal safe embedded behind the insulation, marked only by a faint X in pencil. Combination. November 24, 39, my late wife's birthday. Click. The door swung open. Inside was everything I needed to obliterate Elaine's little performance. 3 things sat in the safe. An unaltered copy of my original will. One that didn't include Elaine or her charity foundations. A sworn affidavit from my lawyer dated 6 months ago, revoking any future documents made under duress. A handwritten letter from my wife, the real matriarch of this family, warning me, even back then, about gold diggers who smile with polished teeth and empty eyes. I hadn't needed the letter. But holding it in my hand again, I felt her voice like it was whispering straight through time. You built this empire. Don't let a pretty lie inherit it. At 4:17 a.m., I made 2 phone calls. One to my lawyer. Real lawyer, not the family attorney Elaine liked to butter up. And one to a private investigator named Torrance Quinn, who once helped me catch a CFO laundering funds through an offshore shell company. Torrance owed me a favor. I gave him a single order. Track down every property, account, and shell company linked to Elaine. If she forged a will, she left fingerprints. Find them. He didn't ask why. He just said, give me 3 days. By morning the board members at my company, the ones who still respected me, received a sealed packet marked, Contingency Protocol, Burn File 3A. Inside were instructions to freeze Elaine and Alex out of all decision-making processes pending review, citing fraudulent estate activity under investigation. By 9 a.m., their access cards wouldn't even open the company elevator. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Because Elaine thought this was a matter of inheritance. She thought I was fighting to protect my money. What she didn't know was that the money wasn't the real prize. Not yet. The real prize was in the clause she skimmed over. The one buried deep in the appendix of the old will. The one that mentioned a trust for a grandson who hadn't even been born yet. And the moment that child entered the world, everything would change. Chapter 4. The Grandson Clause. I returned home from the hospital in silence. My daughter-in-law Abigail had been discharged after 3 hours of medical observation. They said she was lucky, whatever she ingested had only mild sedative effects. I didn't tell them the truth. She hadn't ingested anything. Because she'd swapped her own glass. The champagne flute she thought she was handing me was actually her own. I had made the switch earlier when no one was watching, after seeing her slip a crushed capsule into what she believed was my drink. A fast sleight of hand. Years of hosting high-stakes boardroom dinners had taught me how to make such moves invisible. She didn't know she'd poisoned herself until the panic started to set in. But now, back at my estate, I sat in my study and opened the box that had been hidden in my bedroom safe for 5 years. It contained my original will and the revised version. I had suspected for years that Abigail's charm hid a ruthless ambition. She married my only son, Devin, quickly. Too quickly. Her smiles were flawless. Her flattery, practiced. And her concern for me, performative. When I announced I was donating a large portion of my $32 million estate to charity, her mask slipped. Only for a second. That was 5 years ago. That's when I updated the will. The new will included a clause that had never existed before. One Abigail had no knowledge of. It was called the Grandson Clause. I read it aloud to myself one last time, as if to confirm the wisdom of my decision. Should any act of malice, greed, or attempt upon the life or well-being of the testator be suspected or proven, and should the heirs by marriage be found culpable or complicit, then full inheritance shall bypass them and vest instead in the direct bloodline. Namely, my grandson Eli, upon his 18th birthday. Until then, the estate shall be administered in trust under legal supervision. Eli. My quiet, artistic grandson. 10 years old with a stutter and an eye for painting birds. He was nothing like his mother. He once asked me if a hummingbird could remember people. I told him yes, if the person was kind. He said, then I hope the hummingbirds remember me. That moment, that one sentence, was worth more than any business deal I ever made. The next morning I visited my lawyer. I handed him both versions of the will. He nodded, understanding instantly. You want to activate the revision? Yes, I said. Also, notify the trust officer. I want the clause enforced immediately. And what about your son? I paused. Devin was blind to his wife's schemes, maybe willfully so. He'll learn in time, I said. Some truths can't be told. They must be revealed. Final chapter. The champagne truth. The ballroom, once glittering with soft candlelight and mellow jazz, had turned into a scene of sterile panic. Paramedics hovered over Emily, my daughter-in-law, now pale and heaving on the marble floor. The champagne glass she'd sipped from lay shattered beside her, gold bubbles fizzing into the rug. Her husband, my son Nathan, knelt by her, screaming for help, confused and terrified. Guests circled in stunned silence. No one touched their drinks anymore. But I remained still at the head table, calm as a winter lake. Minutes earlier, as Emily toasted to my legacy, I saw her hand glide toward my glass, just a subtle touch, almost graceful, too graceful. She leaned in with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My instincts, honed from years of boardroom warfare, betrayals and hostile takeovers, whispered, she's not just toasting. So I had done what any survivor would. I waited until her attention shifted to the cameras flashing for the birthday speech and quietly rotated our glasses. Now, as she convulsed under the chandeliers, Nathan's cries slicing through the music, I stood slowly and tapped my fork to a crystal. The sound rang sharp and final. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, voice smooth. I think it's time for a confession. Gasps fluttered like moths around the room. My attorney, seated inconspicuously beside the catering staff, gave a subtle nod. We were prepared. I know many of you came tonight expecting a celebration of wealth, of status, of generational success. I looked directly at my son, who now glanced up, dazed. But what we are actually witnessing is a cautionary tale. I pulled a thick manila envelope from my inside jacket pocket. Inside, photographs of Emily meeting a known poison vendor, bank statements showing large transfers from Nathan's account to a private offshore wallet, hidden camera footage from my own home study. Emily rifling through locked drawers, holding forged documents of my living will. Whispers erupted. I let the room stew in them for a moment. I didn't just switch glasses, I continued. I also switched the narrative. This wasn't champagne. It was a test. The liquid Emily drank was harmless, just a strong diuretic and a sleep-inducing agent, enough to mimic distress, but not enough to harm. Emily, now conscious but groggy, blinked in confusion as medics eased her onto a stretcher. Her eyes met mine. Horror dawned in them. She knew. And this, I added, holding up the envelope, is why I rewrote my will 2 weeks ago. The new heir isn't my son or his wife. I turned slowly toward a shy teenager near the edge of the dance floor. My grandson, Daniel, their son. The only innocent in this web. He's the only one who's ever visited me without asking for money, who reads to me when I'm tired, who saved the first chessboard I ever gave him. I waved him over. He approached, stunned. I hope the world he inherits is nothing like the one his parents tried to build. Then I handed him a velvet box. Inside was the original key to my company's founder vault, symbolically and legally transferring power. The guests broke into hushed applause, a different kind of applause, not the polite claps for birthday wishes, but the reverent kind, the sound reserved for justice being witnessed live. As Daniel looked up at me with wide eyes and trembling hands, I smiled, not with triumph, but with relief. Because for once, the right person had won. And for Emily, well, the champagne truth had finally surfaced. Epilogue, the final toast I never took. The morning after the party, the mansion was silent. Confetti still clung to the velvet drapes. Half-filled glasses sat untouched and the faint scent of roses and ruined plans lingered in the air. I stood on the terrace with my coffee, overlooking the city that once bowed to my empire. Now, I had bowed out. On my terms, my phone vibrated beside the cup. Another email from Nathan, the 5th this week. Dad, please. She's sorry. We were desperate. Can we talk? Daniel's scared. We'll sign whatever you want. I didn't reply. That final toast, the one Emily had raised before everything crumbled, I never lifted my glass. Because I already knew. I knew their smiles were rehearsed, their compliments hollow, their loyalty for sale. The toast was never meant for me. It was for the image of me they hoped would be gone by morning. But I stayed and they vanished. Nathan moved out 3 days later. Emily disappeared into silence after being released from the hospital. No charges were filed. I gave them that mercy, but the damage was irreversible. They were out of the will, out of the house, out of Daniel's life unless he chose otherwise. Daniel stayed with me for the summer. We planted a vegetable garden. He learned to drive my vintage truck. And one night while stargazing, he turned to me and whispered, "Grandpa, will I grow up like them?" I placed my hand over his. "Only if you forget this lesson." Now, every year on my birthday, Daniel toasts me with apple juice. And every time I raise my glass back, not because I trust blindly, but because that toast, simple, honest, undesigned, is the only one that ever mattered. The final toast I never took became the first one I could truly believe in.